Okay, welcome to the Empowr podcast. I'm here with Augustine Diji today. Augustine is the founder of two brokerage firms. One of them we're here at today at Greene Grand, and we're going to talk about some real estate investment, property ownership. There's a lot of really, really interesting things that are super, super valuable. So, Augustine, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to spend time interviewing with you.
Yeah. So we'll kick it off. I just want to give people a chance to know kind of who you are and what got you into real estate.
Okay, great. Well, I've been in real estate for close to 20 years. And I attribute my interest from my father, believe it or not. My father, at the time, a doctor, bought his first house, but as part of his entrepreneurial vibe, he bought a second building to have a private practice. And in that process, it wasn't just having a building to have an office to help patients, it was an investment. So I'd ride with him to the house when the roof needed to be fixed or the boiler needed to be repaired. He was truly a real estate investor. And from that, I started to become more interested in the idea of managing property. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, in a suburban area. We had a nice piece of land and a big house. Even during that process, my dad was a handyman. So I would help him fix items in the basement, garden, whatnot. And so my vibe about real estate just sort of sprung from that. Fast forward to coming to New York City.
Yeah, New York City is very different from Buffalo, I'm assuming.
Very different from Buffalo, very energetic, very exciting, and extremely diverse. And in that diversity, I was diverse in how I lived. At one time, I lived in Chelsea. At one time, I lived in Harlem. I lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant. I lived in Flatbush. I now live in Clinton Hill. So moving around various neighborhoods in the city, seeing how people lived, really brought my energy towards, I love real estate because it's really important where people live, the surrounding communities, the surrounding amenities, and I became familiar with what people needed when they were moving in, and I got lucky and purchased my first property in 2003.
Okay. So, and living in all the different neighborhoods and seeing the different just real estate landscapes. What's going on? You don't love Queens? No love for Queens? Only Brooklyn, Manhattan? What's happening here?
I think that's a great question. You know, when I lived in Manhattan, that was the first place I lived. Brooklyn was a non-entity. People would make fun of Brooklyn. I'm not going across the river to Brooklyn. In fact, I remember being in Manhattan and calling one of my ex-girlfriend's mothers and said, look, I need to go to Brooklyn to start a business. Should I even consider it? And she said, don't worry about it. And she was right. It was from Harlem, I moved into Flatbush, Brooklyn. And in Flatbush, Brooklyn, it's primarily a strong West Indian neighborhood, but on a cusp of gentrification. And from that experience, seeing the diversity, understanding that Brooklyn is more than just this across the bridge from Manhattan, the little cousin of Manhattan, it was a thriving neighborhood. I didn't get that chance in Queens. I didn't get a chance and I know Queens is vibrant and diverse, but I never had that chance to live in Queens and spend the time to understand it. So which point being, real estate is based on experience, where you are, where you're located. So props to Queens. I think Queens is exciting. I just don't know it yet.
Yeah, I'm just messing with you. Okay, and I know, so a lot of people have real estate for different reasons. Some people just have it to live in the house. A lot of other people use it as investments. I think also other people try and live in the house and they view it as an investment, which, I hear a lot of different things that, your house really isn't an asset unless you're using it to make money. So can you speak on just real estate as an investment versus like equities, stocks, bonds, and all that stuff? So how does real estate fall into this landscape?
Okay, well, it is a form of investment, and the goal for investing in real estate is to make more money. Same thing with stocks. Same thing with bonds, and same thing with starting a business. So real estate is just a method of increasing wealth. Real estate has certain technical ways in which you're successful in it and to grow such, and the same thing with stocks and bonds and or in business. So it really depends on what you want to do when you invest. Real estate has a certain list of rules that are pretty hard fast, and if you generally follow them, you can become successful in real estate.
Okay, so equity building properties. So when somebody wants to, so what type of person and what type of investment goals do they have if they want to have an equity building property?
Well, let's start off with the word equity. Equity represents a relationship between, for example, let's say I have a property and I paid $1 million for it, and you'd like to purchase it for $2 million. That difference from what I paid, which is $1 million, and what you're willing to purchase, $2 million, is equity. Maybe next month you're willing to pay $900,000 for it. Now your offer to what you'll spend is less than what I paid for it. That's negative equity. So the equity is really a relationship when it is being exploited between two parties. So an equity investment essentially means, to some extent, am I going to get lucky when I buy this piece of property, and will it double in value or increase in value? It's hard to tell. There are ways to ensure there's potential equity. For example, you buy a property for $1 million, and most people borrow money. So let's say I buy a property for $1 million and borrow $500,000. That's a debt. As I pay the mortgage debt, the $500,000 goes down to $450,000 to $400,000. So as the debt is lowered, I've increased my equity because I have less debt. So equity is something that becomes when it's used. If it is not used, then it doesn't become anything. So equity investing, I would say it's more of a concept of two ways. If you're a homeowner, your goal is to buy a property, pay down the debt, live there long enough, and the trends of real estate generally appreciates over time. Same thing with stocks and bonds or investment. So you hope that appreciation, you'll capture that benefit. Some people like to buy a property, fix it and flip it. You buy a property for under market, let's say $100,000, you put in another $100,000 to fix it up, and now you have $200,000 invested, and by investing that extra $100,000, it's now worth $500,000. So now you have a $300,000 spread. Essentially, your investment increased the value. You know the equity by selling it. So equity investing is a sort of it's a very loose type of concept. I don't know if you would just say, look, I just want to be an equity investor. It's equity investing plus these are the steps I need to do to maximize the potential.
Okay, so when somebody starts off as a buyer, a first-time buyer or investor, let's say stay in the equity realm for right now, what are some of the things that they need to account for, or that you see, or maybe even mistakes you see that typically happen for first-time buyers?
A first-time buyer may be less interested in equity and more interested in a home and the comforts and the neighborhood and the school system. First-time buyer is interested in, what will this home do for me and my life? Equity, if it increases in equity, becomes a benefit for them down the road. An investor, their goal is, I want to buy this property for undervalue, fix it, and then sell it at a later date. What are mistakes a first-time buyer can make when it comes to equity? I don't think there's many, because equity is not a big issue for a first-time home buyer. It's the house, it's the structure, it's how it's built that matters the most. Equity could be important to an investor if they want to get a spread over investing.
Okay. So people who do buy homes, is there a pathway to buying or having a mortgage and then also being able to invest in other properties, or does that tie up your money and your credit?
Great question. There is a pathway. So, for example, let's say you buy a building for $1,000,000 and you borrow $500,000. By using that leverage, the $500,000 loan, you don't have to come out of your own pocket. So you freed up your money to do other options. So debt can be good. In that instance, you're able to acquire that property. If there's equity, you can borrow more money against the equity, and for home equity line of credit. And from that, you can use that money to invest. So I think that mortgages are beneficial, especially now with interest rates low, if it allows you to get into a purchase of a property and through your ultimate objective outcome, you're able to sort of map it out.
So what do you think about these programs like the Bank of America's NACA and first-time home buyers where you could put a lower down payment? If you're looking to have more money or liquid cash to move around, is it more advantageous to put a very, very low down payment and then use your money for other things? Or does that increase your credit, like your use of credit, and then ties you up more?
Great question. First, it does increase your use of credit and it does tie you up more because you have a higher loan to value situation. But at the same time, you're not utilizing available cash. So the less money you put down on a property, the more money you have in hand. So really the question is, what's your outcome? What is your desired outcome? What are you looking to do? So if by getting a mortgage that requires a low down payment and that extra cash can be utilized where you can get a good return, it could make sense. However, perhaps putting more down could be more beneficial because putting that money into the purchase might be a better investment than holding on to that extra cash. Each decision must be evaluated.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you plan on doing with the extra cash you have on hand.
Depends on what you plan on doing. Think about this. What do most people do? What do we all do with extra cash? I can tell you, I've had extra cash sit in Chase, earning nothing. I've become a bit wiser. And so, for example, I'll use ally.com, or I found some online high interest savings and checking accounts that pay between 1.5% to 2.5%. That's better than what most of us do, whether when we let our money sit in Chase, sit in Bank of America, or whatnot, doing nothing. And over time, money can lose its value because of inflation. Your purchasing power decreases. So when you said what you want to do with that money is important, it's extremely important. There's time value to money. So if having that extra money will allow you to make a move in a relatively short period of time, it could make sense. But if just having the extra money just to have it, it might be better to put it into the purchase. Why? You'll have a lower mortgage. And what does a lower mortgage mean? You're making a lower monthly payment. Remember, a mortgage is consistent of what you borrow plus interest, and a mortgage is amortized. Amortization means that when you borrow, when you borrow money to buy a property, the first 15 years of the mortgage payments go primarily to interest and touch the principal very little. Why do banks do that? Why not keep it simple? Because they're smart. Yeah. Give us our interest now. Pay it down later. And by the way, they have amortization tables and charts. It lets you see how much of your dollars goes to interest and principal, and if you keep a loan for the life of the loan, how much you're spending for it.
Yeah, and I was watching a video about the amortization of the mortgage payments, and how a lot of times once they hit that 15 years, here comes the brokers and the financial planners like, oh yeah, or whoever it is saying, oh, you should refinance. And once they refinance, that it resets the clock where they start paying the interest again and not really paying off or building equity?
That's a good question, and that's a good point. If you refinance, you can reset the clock, and that resetting of the clock resets that whole amortization cycle. It could be beneficial. Sometimes we refinance to get a lower interest rate. For example, people are refinancing now, interest rates are below 4%. 10 years ago, interest rates were at 6%, 7%, which is not a bad interest rate. So it could make sense to refinance and restart the clock if a lower interest rate means you're spending less of your cash, and that the additional saved cash allows you to do something else. So everything requires some form of due diligence and analysis and a little bit of number crunching to see what makes sense.
People don't like to do math.
No one likes to do math. We live on dreams, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to buy that property in Bed-Stuy for $1 million, and I know it sells for $2.5 million, and all I have to do this, and I'll make $1 million. And that happens. As one becomes more skilled in real estate investing, you understand it's really more of there's a science to really knowing your numbers and doing the research and knowing that speculative and grandiose outcomes rarely happen. It's luck. You can analyze your investment over time, and it takes time, and really know where you're going.
So what are some of your favorite resources for finding research on different properties and areas where you can invest or start, exploring investing?
I would say, with the advent of technology, there's so much great information out there. I think the number one website for just understanding real estate investing is biggerpockets.com. BiggerPockets they have podcasts, communities, investors, ideas where it is legitimate and I think very credible. It's normal people like ourselves talking about what we're doing. I think that's a great resource generally to learn about real estate investing, to get your feet wet and to go deeper. If we're thinking about New York City specific information, I'd probably recommend Property Shark because it's a aggregator of information about real estate where it talks about the property, its zoning, its taxes, similar sold properties, demographics. It really ties that information together. If we're looking nationally, I might suggest Zillow. Zillow's probably the largest aggregator of real estate information and sales, so you can compare. And with Zillow, they talk about community and schooling and taxes and whatnot. So bigger pockets to get yourself understanding real estate investing. If we're talking about New York City, New York State, Property Shark, and I believe Property Shark's expanded into other states, and then Zillow.
Okay, and so by the time a property hits like a Zillow or a Trulia or a lot of these aggregator websites, are like the good deals or the best deals already gone? Like where are the best deals?
The best deal is when you as the buyer or investor, whatever you call yourself, are able to locate a property that fits your needs, and after you've done your due diligence, the numbers make sense. So this idea of an amazing deal, perhaps it's there, but there's always a good deal if it fits your desired outcome and where you are financially and where you want to be down the road. So when a property hits these aggregator websites or it's marketed, it could be a great deal. It may not be. You will not know until you've inspected the property, done your numbers, understood the surrounding areas to really determine. There's so much to know when it comes to real estate. And so a good deal, you could discover aspects of a deal that maybe no one else saw. And so it's what you do to really dig into what's available and how hard you work.
Okay, so as far as like where to find them, like, is there like a whole market, like even just going like something as rudimentary as going door to door and just asking if people are selling? Like, would you find a better could you find a better deal? Because there are some situations where, whether it's aligned with your portfolio or your investment goals, there's some deals that are just like,
Home runs.
yeah, it's a home run, and you don't have to even know how to swing the bat, right?
I will say you mentioned this idea of going door to door, and it makes me think of the toughest skill of being a salesperson. It's the cold calling. You have to have a lot of, because there's tons of rejection. For every 100 no's, you might get it one yes. So that's the hardest form, the most difficult form of finding a good deal. But if you're willing to go door to door, dig, and meet directly that individual who's willing to part from their property at such an amazing price, you might get a good deal doing that. I think that I want to emphasize again, good deals are everywhere. It just depends on where you position yourself. I agree with you. You have to really work hard. Going door to door is really getting it to the, but there are people who invest and don't see the property. They'll invest based on information given to them from a professional, broker, or real estate agent, or they'll invest based on the research online. Maybe Google has a Google map and some pictures, and they understand some demographics, and they've been watching it, and they send an inspector there to look at it. They have other individuals to do their due diligence. So it really depends.
So how much should you do research on your own, and how much should you trust your broker?
Another great question. Back in the day, let's say that prior to information being freely available, the broker, the agent, the person with that knowledge they were very important. They had the access to what one would need to make the decision. You had to trust them because there was no other way of getting that information. Now, information's available. So I believe that one should first do it on their own. Get a baseline of what you want to do. If you don't have, in my opinion, a baseline or foundation of your desired outcome or your objectives, then you are dependent on an individual sharing and telling you, oh, this is what's available. So it's get some knowledge. Look, there's so much information. Sometimes it's hard to know when to stop, but get enough where you feel comfortable, and then you'll need a professional broker, agent, whatnot, to kind of guide you. For example, I noticed with Zillow or first-time home buyers or even investors, they'll do their research online and actually reach out to the broker maybe handling the deal, or if it's for sale by owner, they'll call the owner first and do their own work. Then they'll bring in a broker or other representative to handle negotiating and whatnot.
Okay. And when searching for an area that you want to, or even identifying, what are the certain key things you want to do when identifying an area to do further research?
Another good question. I can really only speak to New York City, and that's where I'm most familiar with. And I don't know if this necessarily translates throughout the country. One thing, it's location, being near transportation, driverless cars, delivery. Everyone wants to be able to come and go when they want, when they please, ease of movement, and be back where they need to be. So one big thing is transportation, ease of movement, I think is a key factor. Another aspect to look at is what's happening business-wise, commercially. Do you see new businesses coming in? Big box big box businesses, Macy's or some type of business, or more banks coming in. So it's the commercial development that feeds the community. Also income changes. If you see based on research, the median income changing. You could also check the census. Perhaps you'll see a large migration of professionals or groups coming into this one area to say this is a place to be. It could be the types of buildings that are being built. So there's many different factors, but to me it's, look, near transportation, commercial development, I would say good schools, and the type of businesses that come in.
I know identifying trends in any sort of investment is important. So, what are some of the key factors? Because you mentioned seeing the commercials, businesses come in. Sure. So, what are some of the first trends you see when you start seeing a neighborhood turning around?
I think that's a great question. The trends will be the change in businesses. So, if you see the type of businesses that their demographic are those who have higher incomes, and then you also see the people who are moving to neighborhood seem to be involved in jobs and services that pay higher incomes. If you start to see rents increase, then you can kind of get an idea that, wait a minute, this is a neighborhood on the upswing.
So how can a middle class person identify these things that's not in the real estate game?
That's an interesting question. Are you implying that someone at a certain income level might have a difficult time getting into real estate? Is that the question?
Yeah, because I feel if you, like, your father was in real estate, so that exposed you to a lot of things about real estate, and you're able to have these conversations and just see how things operate. There's a lot of people whose parents have rented their whole lives, or they live in public housing, or they don't have any family members who actually own their own property. Just not exposed to these things. And they may not even be exposed to high-paying jobs. They don't really have too many people to rely on to get this information. So how can somebody who's in a lower income bracket or like the standard middle-class income bracket start moving towards investing in real estate?
The first step would be desire and passion, regardless of where one stands. So if the person whose income is not, it's moderate, has this desire and passion to get into real estate, they will then do the research and work to see what it will take, given their income and status, to position themselves, whether it takes them a year to position or 5 years. For example, someone who's of a limited income status could be relentless in saving and a relentless expense, cutter, and maybe in 10 years they've saved $100,000. And with that $100,000, they've made sure they've kept their credit solid, and they've slowly but surely increased their income. And in this environment where you just you don't have to put down a big down payment, they position themselves to get into real estate. So and going back to this idea of having that mentor or knowledge up front, there's resources now. That's why I mentioned Bigger Pockets, that allows every person, it is leveled the playing field, because knowledge is power. Knowledge is that first step towards reaching your objective, reaching your desired outcome. And with that knowledge, you can put in the pieces and the people to get there. You just have to have the passion to want it. So anyone generally can get themselves to buying real estate. It's the energy and work they put behind it to make it happen. So even if they can't purchase a property in a month, maybe they can do it in 5 years, 7 years. You have to have that passion, that desire.
I do follow, I don't know if you follow Jay Morrison or if you know of what he does. He's real big into helping people or motivating people to invest in real estate, people who may not have a lot of money, and different ways to do that. So he says a lot of interesting things. What are some, maybe, because necessarily you don't need to really go to the bank to get a loan for property. I think a lot of people, they think that's the only way to really get loans for property. What are some other methods that you can access money that's not necessarily just from the bank?
That's a great question. I keep saying that.
Hey,
I'm not trying to butter you up. I really do think they're great questions. Seriously. So we went to Baltimore not long ago. And in Baltimore, the city of Baltimore is selling properties for $5,000.
$5,000. I heard some. Well, actually, who was the one who told me about the craziest stuff?
There's
But
stuff that could be as little as $500.
I heard like one. You saying $1?
$1, well, that will be implemented. But we went to auctions where a building was 3-family, 2-family buildings were selling for $5,000. So there was this auction, and $5,000 is not a ton of money to begin to spend to buy a piece of real estate. Now, each piece of property needed to be rehabbed and fixed, and it was in areas of Baltimore that the neighborhood still needed infrastructure and whatnot. Once the auction was over, and for those successful bidders, as soon as they walked out the door, there was a row of private individuals like you and I ready to lend money. So private individuals will lend money. It's called hard money lending. And then there's syndicating investments where, for example, you say, hey, Augustine, I found a property. I'm trying to raise $200,000. I'm speaking to some really close friends of mine. You are one of them. Can you come to a meeting so I can share with you what it is I'm doing? I come to your meeting, you do a presentation, and I said, look, here's $25,000. So there are, besides the bank, you can go to someone privately, you can go to lending club. There are various resources in which people can raise and put money together. Friends and family, as I said, hard money from an individual, and some non-traditional banks.
Yeah, I think money's the biggest thing. People get scared and say, I don't have enough money. So when you're dealing with people, well, I guess maybe even this, how do you get access or get into a network where you could find people who have money instead of, is it just like something, posting a good deal on Facebook, or you have to go to certain events where you'll connect with people? Yeah, so I guess, more so is how do you access this network?
Well, you start off with some great ideas. Posting something on Facebook, attract others to what you're trying to do, going to networking events, doing your research as to what are the various ways of raising money and who has an event or a online seminar or a referral that can help me raise the money. So I think it's that effort to go and do the research to raise the money. But I can tell you that in this current environment, interest rates are low. There's quite a bit of money flooded into the system. The Federal Reserve has pumped tons of money into the system. It's kind of a reaction to the Great Recession that happened in 2008, 2009, when it appeared the whole market would crash. So the Federal Reserve and government said to prevent that crash, the United States Federal Reserve said they decided we need to print and pump money, pump, creating a large swell of money in the system. And in fact, worldwide, many central banks did the same thing. So there's this massive amounts of money just moving around, which is why there's so many options for individuals to access this money. You could find a deal, let's say in Queens, and you've met the owner. An owner says, I'd like to sell this property to you for $500,000. You've done your research and it's worth $750,000. And there's a reason why the owner wants to sell it to you. Based on your work, research, meeting the owner, let's say you've tied up the deal. You would be able to, it's likely if you shop that deal to different lenders, they'll say, wow, we're willing to lend on this deal because we're comfortable, it'll be secured. When people lend, they secure it against the real estate. And the plan that was put forward will generate enough income to make our payments. And the exit strategy, which is to sell in 5 years, looks good to us. So it's possible to get the money. I'm not going to use the word easy because nothing's easy in real estate, but accessibility is more open than I've seen it.
So I know I mentioned the NACA thing with Bank of America before. Are you familiar with
NACA? Sure.
Yeah. So what kind of goes into that as far as, because from what I hear, it sounds like you don't have to pay any PMI. There's no money down. They don't really check your credit. Like that sounds a little too good to be true. So like, what are the drawbacks and benefits of a program like that?
I believe if I understand NACA correctly, their purpose is to get first-time home buyers to buy their home. I don't know if their purpose is to get investors to make a lot of money. It's how do we get first-time home buyers into homes? How do we educate them so they can make the best decision, and we give them the resources? Some of the cons to NACA, I can't say there are. I don't know if there are any. If their ultimate objective is to help people become an educated first-time home buyer. So I wouldn't say there's anything negative to NACA. I believe their purpose as a nonprofit is to educate people to become qualified, wise first-time home buyers.
So honestly, like right now, and my goals could change. As
Yeah.
I want to find out new information,
Yeah.
find out about different investments. But I did want to use like a first-time home buyer's loan to maybe get a multi-unit property, so I can rent out other ones, and then also, you know, start building equity. So start building equity and have some cash flow coming in. So, what's your opinion on people who try and do that? Is that something that's you've seen work in the past, or some things that you see problems with?
Can you repeat? People trying to do what exactly?
So, buy a multi-unit property that they live in. So it's a first-time home, but they're also able to rent out other units.
I think it's an excellent strategy for a few reasons. One, when you buy a property that's income producing and you live in it, guess what? Less money goes out of your pocket to maintain and carry the property, since you are collecting cash flow rent that will cover expenses. So that's a winner. Additionally, there's a potential tax benefit. If you live in a property for at least 2 years continuously, and this is a federal tax benefit, and then you decide to sell that property within the timeline guidelines as put out by the IRS, you decide to sell that property, you may not have to pay a tax on a capital gain. What does that mean? Typically, if you buy a property for $500,000, you sell it for $1 million, you've just made $500,000. That's called a capital gain. If you live in New York City, the federal government takes a piece of that.
And the state wants their piece too.
The state wants their piece, and guess what? The city too. Boom, boom, boom. So 500,000 could end up being maybe 300,000 in terms of profit in your pocket. Well, by living in this property, it becomes your principal primary residence. And when you decide to sell, the federal government will say, look, $250,000 as an individual of that money, of that profit, you don't have to pay a single tax on. That's yours. That, and why is that important? That additional cash, that tax savings, lets you roll the money into a next deal.
Yeah, how much do you have? 6 months to do it? How long is it?
No. That's you're thinking of something else. We can talk about. But no, it's you have to live in the property long enough. It becomes your primary residence. So when you sell it, you're able to get the capital gains exclusion. You were thinking perhaps of the 1031 exchange, which is when you sell, you use all of the money proceeds to put into another deal where you don't pay any tax.
Okay.
Going back to your original question, living in a property, collecting income to me is the best. Right? Think about it as the best of all worlds. It's you have a home and you're collecting income. And that strategy, if done well, allows you to take, let's say it's a 2-family, it increases in equity, the income covers it, you've saved money, you decide to sell, you don't pay that capital gains tax because of you've done that capital gains exclusion timeline, you can now roll that money into something else. And you can actually roll that money, take that money and pay a tax and use it for something else, or roll it 1031 exchange, you have more in your pocket. To me, it's a winner.
Why do you think most people aren't doing that?
That's an interesting question. I think people do it when they understand. The idea of why most people, I think the most is most people aren't buying real estate. Meaning most people aren't buying real estate just for investments. Many people are buying for home. But when you're looking to be an investor, it's not everyone's doing it. So I believe that once people understand the strategy, they will employ it once they know. So the information's there. It's not as if you can't understand. It's a very simple strategy. It's been around forever. And it's talked about by various investors, and homeowners will tell you the strategy and say, look, this is how I succeeded. Every 2 years, I sell, capital gains exclusion, flip it in. It's a common strategy. It's something you understand as you start to learn more about real estate investing.
Okay, and I had a friend who wanted me to ask about the significance of property tax and how big of a factor should that be in your buying process?
Huge factor. For example, property taxes are very high in Long Island. And so, and think of this, property tax, which always has to be paid and which likely goes up over time, is an expense that cuts into whatever income you're collecting and or profit. So property taxes are very important in determining your return on investment.
What has a lot of good property tax? Or what area has favorable property taxes?
Oh gosh, no one thinks property taxes are favorable. I think the question is where is it comparatively lower? It depends. Property taxes are based on various factors, but it could be the type of building, whether there's a commercial play on it. It could be based on a school district. I had mentioned before, Long Island typically has higher property taxes, but part of that is those property taxes go into their school system.
So if you don't have kids, then you really don't care about the school system, and that could save you on property taxes.
Yeah, well, no matter who, yeah, exactly. If you don't have kids, then you might not be too excited investing in an area where a lot of property taxes goes to schools and your kid's not benefiting from it, unless there are other reasons. But I think that property tax it's the expense. Period. End of story. You know it's an expense, and the likelihood of a property tax going down in the future is close to zero.
The format is real sickness, contagious. Here I come, Jay-Z.